What if I told you that the most dangerous force shaping your life isn't greed, hatred, or fear, but blind obedience? Not the kind that screams through dictatorships or marches in lockstep down totalitarian streets, but the quiet kind, the kind that whispers in classrooms, in offices, in churches, in our own homes. It's the kind that smiles at you from behind a desk and says, "That's just the way it is." And the terrifying part is that we rarely notice it. It's like air, we breathe it, we live in it, and we don't question it, because to question it feels like betrayal. But what if the real betrayal is not asking questions at all? What if our willingness to obey without thought is the very thing that turns good people into passive instruments of harm? That's the dark psychology we're exploring today, how systems, authority, and fear shape us into obedient beings without our consent, and how most of us don't even realize it's happening. We're trained from birth to obey. It's not even malicious at first, it starts as guidance. Parents say, "Do as you're told." Teachers say, "Raise your hand." Religion says, "Submit." Governments say, "Follow the law." Companies say, "Stay in line." And we learn, over and over again, that obedience equals safety, approval, and belonging. But here's the problem. Obedience, when untethered from conscience, becomes a weapon. And the person it turns against first is you. Because the more we obey without reflection, the more we lose the ability to think for ourselves. We trade our minds for comfort. We silence our inner voice in favor of external commands. Obedience becomes a habit, and then a reflex, and then a value. And eventually, we don't even notice we're obeying, we just call it being a good person. But are we? Or are we just well trained?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you obeyed something you didn't truly believe in just to avoid conflict, punishment, or judgment? Maybe it was a rule at work that felt unethical but mandatory. Maybe it was a belief your culture handed you, and you repeated it without thinking. Maybe it was a moment when someone in power told you to stay quiet, and you did. Not because you agreed, but because disobedience felt too risky, too lonely. That moment, that quiet surrender, is the heart of blind obedience. And we all do it. Not because we're evil, but because we're human. We're wired to conform. Our brains evolved in tribes where rejection meant death. So we obey, we imitate, we submit not because it's right, but because it's safe. And in the modern world, that wiring gets hijacked by systems, by institutions, by authority figures who benefit from your submission. They don't need to coerce you if they can train you to obey yourself. Take a look at Stanley Milgram's infamous experiment in the 1960s. Participants were asked to administer electric shocks to a stranger, an actor, but they didn't know that each time the person answered a question incorrectly, the shocks increased with every wrong answer. The stranger screamed, begged, eventually went silent. And still, over 60% of participants continued to the highest level. Why? Because a man in a lab coat said, "Please continue." Those 3 words were enough to override their moral compass. But think about that, ordinary people doing something they believed was wrong, not out of malice, but out of obedience, out of the belief that authority knows best, that someone else is responsible, that they were just following orders. That phrase, "just following orders," has echoed through every courtroom of war crimes, every excuse for injustice, every defense of silence in the face of evil. But it's not just history, it's now. It's us. We obey traffic laws, social norms, religious doctrines, educational systems, corporate policies. And that's not inherently bad. Order has its place. But the danger begins when we stop questioning, but when obedience becomes automatic. When we assume the rules are right just because they exist. That's when obedience turns from virtue into vice. The philosophers like Kant warned us about this centuries ago. He called it self-imposed immaturity, our unwillingness to use our own understanding without the guidance of another. In other words, to obey blindly is to stay a child in your own mind. And yet, how many of us are still mentally children, afraid to question, afraid to stand alone, afraid to say, "No, this is wrong," when everyone else is nodding yes? And here's the trickiest part. Obedience doesn't always look like obedience. Sometimes it looks like politeness, like humility, like loyalty. But the true test is this: would you still make the same choice if no one was watching? If the crowd disappeared? If the authority figure vanished? That's the difference between conscious action and blind obedience. Because blind obedience is about appearances, it's about fitting in, not standing up. But real integrity, the kind that changes history, is quiet, lonely, and deeply inconvenient. It's Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat. It's Galileo saying the earth moves. It's whistleblowers risking everything to expose the truth. Those people weren't comfortable. They weren't applauded at first. They weren't obedient, but they were free. Freedom is not the absence of rules, it's the presence of choice. And obedience, when unexamined, steals that choice from us. It turns us into tools. And the system doesn't care why you obey, it only cares that you do. That's the dark psychology at play. It doesn't need to convince you, it just needs to condition you. Like Pavlov's dogs, we learn to salivate at approval, to flinch at disapproval. We become obedient because it feels easier. But easy isn't the same as right, and convenience is not a moral compass. So what do we do? How do we resist the seductive pull of blind obedience? It starts with awareness. You have to notice it. Notice when you agree too quickly, when you go along to get along, when you silence your doubt just to avoid conflict. Then you question. You ask, why am I doing this? Do I actually believe this? Who benefits from my compliance? And finally, you choose, not reactively, not reflexively, but consciously. You choose whether to obey or not based on your values, not on fear, not on habit, not on the herd. But be warned, that choice will cost you. People may call you difficult, arrogant, rebellious. You might lose approval. You might face consequences. But you will gain something far more valuable: your mind, your freedom, your integrity. And that, in the end, is the only real power you have in a world that constantly tries to make you small. So here's the question I leave you with. Are you living your life? Or are you just following instructions? Because somewhere deep inside you, there's a voice that knows the difference. And maybe the most radical thing you can do, the most courageous, the most disruptive, is to listen to that voice, even when it tells you to disobey. Let's go deeper, because the truly terrifying part of blind obedience isn't just that we follow, it's that over time, we begin to love following. We begin to need it. The chains tighten, but we stop noticing. And eventually, we stop wanting to break free. This is the final form of obedience, not the one enforced by fear, but the one internalized through conditioning. This is the kind that doesn't need a dictator, a uniform, or a punishment. It just needs a system strong enough to replace your thinking with structure, your doubt with slogans, your freedom with routine. And once that happens, you're no longer being controlled, you're controlling yourself on behalf of the system. That's the silent chain. That's the lie we mistake for peace. Think about school. From a young age, we're taught to sit still, keep quiet, raise our hand, memorize the correct answers. The reward isn't understanding, it's compliance. You're praised not for asking questions, but for repeating the right ones. You're taught that authority lies in the textbook, the teacher, the exam, not in your own curiosity. And slowly, year after year, we absorb a lesson far more dangerous than any math formula or historical oversimplification, that your value is tied to how well you obey. That success is ticking the boxes. That life is a scantron. And by the time we leave school, many of us have internalized that obedience is intelligence, and that to follow is to succeed. But what if the smartest people are the ones who refuse? Then we go to work, and the game continues. You follow orders. You say yes even when you mean no. You suppress your instincts. You dress the part. You sacrifice your time, your health, your creativity, not because it makes you feel alive, but because it makes you feel safe. You trade hours of your life for a paycheck and then call it normal. And maybe you start to forget that there was once a version of you that dreamed bigger, that questioned everything, that didn't want to be just another cog. But now you've got bills, a title, a reputation. And the longer you stay, the more obedience feels like necessity. The more you obey, the harder it becomes to imagine disobeying. And eventually, you don't need a boss to make you comply. You've learned to do it all by yourself. But here's the scariest part. We begin to romanticize our own obedience. We call it professionalism. We call it maturity. We say things like, "That's just how the world works." We mock those who deviate. We shame those who resist. We become the enforcers of our own servitude, and we do it with a smile. The phrase "better safe than sorry" becomes a mantra. But what if safe is just a euphemism for controlled? For invisible chains? Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, warned us about this. He didn't imagine a world of terror and tyranny. He imagined a world of comfort and distraction. A world where people didn't have to be forced into obedience because they were too entertained, too sedated, too apathetic to care about freedom. He wrote, "They love their servitude." And that's the end game of blind obedience, not oppression from without, but addiction from within. We crave the system because it gives us identity. It tells us who we are. It tells us what to want. It tells us what's right. And in return, we give it everything. But what if you stopped? What if you paused the performance, the pretending, the programmed routines, and asked, what do I actually believe? What do I truly want? Who would you be without the rules you've been taught to follow? That question is terrifying because it reveals the truth many of us don't know. We've been so obedient for so long that we've forgotten how to be sovereign. And the system likes it that way. It wants you to be obedient, not original, but predictable, not powerful, managed, not free. Let's take a moment and look at how these systems train us. Not explicitly, not through chains and whips, but through subtle psychological conditioning, and through reward and punishment, through praise and shame, and through inclusion and exclusion. If you obey, you're rewarded with approval, status, security. If you disobey, you're punished with shame, ridicule, isolation. These are not just incentives, they are psychological levers. The modern system doesn't need to use force. It uses your own fear of rejection against you, and it works. Even our language reflects this conditioning. We say, "Don't burn bridges," as if standing up for your values is a kind of social arson. We say, "Don't cause trouble," as if asking hard questions is trouble. We say, "It's not worth it," when someone resists. But what if it is worth it? What if the cost of obedience is your soul? Here's the paradox. The more we obey institutions, the more disconnected we become from ourselves. We become split. There's the outside self, the one that performs, complies, agrees. And then there's the inner self, the quiet voice that says, "This doesn't feel right." And the more we silence that voice, the more we suffer. Depression, anxiety, burnout, these aren't just medical labels. Often they are symptoms of spiritual disobedience, of living a life you didn't choose, or of obeying a path that betrays who you really are. So what does it look like to reclaim your freedom? First, you must become conscious. You must see the programming. You must name the system. Whether it's the corporate ladder, the religious dogma, the cultural script, you must look it in the eye and say, "I see you." Awareness is the first rebellion. Because as long as obedience remains unconscious, it remains unbreakable. Second, you must reconnect with your inner authority. That voice inside you, the one you've ignored, suppressed, doubted, that voice is your compass. It's not always loud. It doesn't always speak in words. But it knows. It knows when you're betraying yourself. It knows when you're lying to fit in. And it knows that obedience without truth is bondage. So listen, trust it, strengthen it. Third, you must practice saying no, not to be defiant, but to be clear. Every no you say to false authority is a yes to your own sovereignty. And yes, there will be consequences. You might lose favor. You might lose opportunity. You might lose friends. But you will gain self-respect. And that is a currency no system can counterfeit. And finally, you must surround yourself with others who have chosen the same path. Because disobedience is lonely, but it doesn't have to be isolated. There is a tribe of thinkers, rebels, artists, builders, mystics, people who have dared to disobey the system in order to build something more real. Find them. Learn from them. Be one of them. Let me ask you a final question. What if obedience is the cage and disobedience is the key? Not reckless rebellion, not chaos for the sake of chaos, but conscious, deliberate, principled disobedience. The kind that says, "I will not obey what I do not believe. I will not follow what I know is false. I will not serve what steals my soul." That kind of disobedience is not destruction, it's creation. It's the birthplace of every movement that ever mattered, every revolution, every paradigm shift, every awakening. It starts with a single person saying no more. So here you are, standing at the edge of your own conditioning. The system is still humming. The rules are still in place. The mask is still available. But you don't have to wear it anymore. You can choose. You can think. You can resist. You can become. Because the world doesn't need more obedient people. It needs more authentic people, more courageous people, and people who are willing to disobey, not to destroy, but to reveal a deeper truth. A truth that no institution can give you. A truth that is already inside you, waiting, watching, whispering, live free. Think deeply, obey no lie. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we begin to build a world that doesn't require obedience, because it's built on understanding. A world where you don't follow blindly, but walk boldly. A world where authority is earned, not imposed. A world where our highest allegiance is not to systems, but to truth. And that, my friend, is a world worth disobeying for. If this video made you question something deep inside, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts, especially the ones you were afraid to say out loud. Because that's where real freedom begins.